Leanne,
Hello.
you have a big black bar in front of your face.
Oh dear. Would you like to stop the share screen?
Spring, yes. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Jason. Stop sharing the screen so that way it's just you and I. And hello, everybody. Sorry for the delay, technical glitches that, teach
That,
us that we're alive.
that we are alive and human.
um, I'm just making sure this is being recorded. And welcome to our new series 3 for our episodes. I'm very excited about this one. Today, we're having a look at something new. So, hello, everybody. I am Leanne.
And I am Jason, and this is Let's Talk.
This is a space where no topic is off limits. We're going to be discussing things like usual, from well being to resilience, money, mindset, relationships, neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and so much more.
Yes, and here always at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real stories, and honest conversations because the things that we often don't talk about are often the things that really matter the most.
Yeah. So, our goal here is simple, it's to spark new ideas, to shift our mindsets, to give us all some practical tools that we can use in our leadership and our life.
Yes. So this series, which is the new series that starts today, series 3 of season 1, is the art of intentional living. And this series is different because it's not just about awareness, but it's also about the execution and alignment and results that it takes to live an intentional life.
Yeah. So, in series 1, we really looked at how to understand our life from a neuroscience and emotional intelligence perspective. Series 2, it was more about understanding our brain and how it shows up and how it limits us or it allows us to do things. And this series 3, is actually changing how we live. So there's going to be lots of stuff that we're going to discuss in this around how can we live intentionally. And that's really what today's episode is all about. It's one of the most important conversations that we can have because what we do and what we know are often two completely different things. And why do we know what to do, but still not do it anyway? So, this knowing doing gap that affects all of us when we know better, but we don't do better, is the conversation that we're leaning into today. And I say we because I know that this shows up in my life a lot. Jason, I'm sure it shows up in yours as well, where we know what we're supposed to do, but we don't
Absolutely.
necessarily do what we're supposed to do. So I'm looking forward to bringing this one to life.
Yes, me too. And yes, it definitely shows up sometimes way more than what I would like it to show up. But we have that thank goodness for that self-awareness, that we have and we've talked about a lot, right? To, kind of catch yourself like midway down so that you can bring yourself back up and, you know, put yourself on the right path in the right direction, right?
And sometimes
So
we don't. Let's face it, really.
yes,
Sometimes we kind of just bury our head in the sand and hide uh, from what we know we should be doing. But the majority of the time, if we can catch ourselves, that's where the shift happens. That's
yeah,
where our life actually shows up.
absolutely. So I want to start off this first portion of our conversation by talking about that frustration that everyone feels, and that's the art kind of being human, right? That versus being like a robot, right? Is that we will feel that sense of frustration, and that shows up in some of the areas such as I know I should, right? So I know I should eat better. I know I should set healthy boundaries. I know I should stop overthinking and overanalyzing and getting in that analysis paralysis. Um, and as Leanne and I know, as recovering perfectionists, we can get into that overthinking, analysis paralysis moments. And then also, I know I should have that conversation to blank, but we don't. And I know that all of us has all of us have felt these I know I shoulds, right? Um, but oftentimes we don't. And what does this create, right? It creates guilt, right? That guilt of like, oh God, I should have had that conversation, or I should have had that conversation with my boss to blank, 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 but I didn't because of blank, blank, blank. And then you go into that overthinking and analysis and da 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 da, right into those hamster wheels. And then it also creates that frustration, that guilt and then that frustration where you're like almost kind of mad at yourself for doing A, B, or C, or not doing A, B, and C, right? And then self-doubt kicks in. And then along with that self-doubt is, well, what's wrong with me? Like, my gosh, I'm this very educated individual, and like I just can't get a job, and like no one wants me, and what am I doing wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. So, so it's almost kind of like one domino clicks and then it goes
Yep.
and we've all been there.
Yep.
Leanne and I understand you. We have been there many times ourselves. So a couple of tools to help you here is, and think of it as reframing, right? That when you go with what's wrong with me, reframe it to there's nothing wrong with me because of A, B, and C, right? And you're not lazy, you're not unmotivated. Just those reframes sometimes, because I know I've done that with myself, and I'm sure you've done this too, Leanne. Just that slight reframe is amazing on how it can kind of, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of kick yourself in the rear to like get up, get going, brush yourself off, and move forward. So what's happening is you're experiencing a gap between awareness and identity driven action. And with that, Leanne, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Yeah. And, that inner dialogue, that itty bitty shitty committee, the I coulda, woulda, shoulda, that kicks in, right? We often should or shit, however you want to say that, all over ourselves. And that actually doesn't make us more motivated to do things. The
Mhm.
reframe does. If I'm sitting in the I should be doing this and I'm not, and I'm lazy and I'm this and I'm that, it doesn't build the motivation required to then get into action, right? Nothing good comes out of it. So the
Nope.
reframe around, I'm not lazy, I'm just in the gap, um, and can really help because it takes the emphasis off self and to understand that it's actually an identity thing. It's not actually a me thing. And we can change that up. So let's have a look at a little bit of the neuroscience behind this. What actually happens behind our mind as we're going through this, because there is a bit of a neuroscience behind the gap.
Mhm.
And to simplify it, your brain, as we keep saying, prioritizes safety, not success, right? And so our brain is actually wired to avoid the discomfort of putting ourselves out there and doing what we should do. It it conserves energy. Doing something new is actually hard work, and our brain doesn't like to do that. It likes to just kind of have everything easy and smooth. So to conserve its energy, we like to repeat the familiar. We don't like the unfamiliar because there's a threat in that. The ambiguity creates that threat state in the brain, and our brain doesn't cope well under that kind of environment. And even if the familiar is not working, we're still inclined to stay with the familiar. And you often hear people say, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And it is a devil because it's not comfortable. Our comfort zones often aren't comfortable, they're just familiar. And they're certainly not getting us what we want. But because of what we want lives in the land of the unknown, we're inclined not to lean into that, right? Because that land of the unknown is not good for our brain. And awareness in itself actually lives in our prefrontal cortex, which is this front part of our brain, the part of our brain that's logical, that does planning and decision making and storing information and retrieving that information and understanding information. So all the executive functions that we need to do is in our prefrontal cortex. And that's also where awareness lives. And this is where the I should comes from, right? It's this logical part of the brain that knows that we should be doing stuff, but we don't actually do it because action in itself is driven by the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system. And there's often a conflict between the logical and the emotional part of our brains, which is why we can get into this kind of stuckness and not moving forward. Emotions, habits, identity, like all of that is where the I don't feel like it comes from, right? This limbic part of the brain, I don't feel like it because I'm fearful. I don't feel like it because of the ambiguity. So we don't often look at it from a fear perspective. We often just kind of go, oh, I'm lazy. But the underlying root cause of this comes from that limbic part of our brain around the uncertainty and the ambiguity. And so then we have this conflict. We have this conflict that has our logical brain that says, do it, just do it, like the Nike ad, just do it.
Mhm.
But the emotional side of our brain goes, no, stay safe. Warning, warning, stay safe. And this creates this internal kind of dilemma that happens for the majority of us at different times. So you don't act based on what you know, which is unfortunate. You act based on what feels safe and what's familiar. And I just want to say that again, because I think we have to cut ourselves some slack here. We don't act based on what we know, like what our logical brain knows. That's not where we come from action from. We act based on what feels safe, what feels familiar. And in truth, that safety mechanism is much stronger than the logical mechanism. Like
Mhm.
when that kicks in, it kind of makes our logical brain go offline. So even though we know we should be doing better, we get stopped by that internal emotional storehouse that wants to keep us safe and protected.
Yeah, and what when you were talking about that, Leanne, kind of what was brought up for me is, when people are changing careers, right? Whether, well, I mean, I would probably say when they're kind of more forced to, in a way, whether like, they've been thinking about it, but then they like lose your job, get laid off, whatever it may be. Like, I see a lot of people get in this safety hamster wheel where it's just like, okay, whatever industry I was in, it's not serving me anymore. It's like they know that from the logical point of view, but from the, okay, let's get off your butt and move forward and start putting the applications in and this, like people, not all people, but I have seen a number of people get stuck in that safety emotional will because it's like I know I should be doing this, but and and it's probably a lot of that self-doubt. Am I good enough? um you know do I have enough skills to move into this new industry? What are people going to think? And the et ceteras, et ceteras, et cetera. So that's what came up for me when you were kind of talking through that.
And as you say that, Jason, I also see it a lot in relationships.
Mm-hmm,
People that know that this relationship isn't necessarily serving me anymore. I shouldn't be in this for whatever reason, but
mm-hmm.
I'm too scared to leave, or I'm too scared to make the jump, or I'm too scared to even consider it because this feels safe, even if it's unsafe and uncomfortable, but it's safer than the unknown, which I have absolutely no idea how that's going to work in the
Mm-hmm.
future. Like really. So, people get stuck in these, bad, and I say bad. It may not be that the relationship is bad, but it's no longer serving you
Right.
forever. And I also see it in decision making. you know, when people need to make a decision about, you know, this or this, and they get into that analysis paralysis and overthinking because of that fear-based limbic response. And even though they're logical, even if you're writing the pros and cons list, the logical side of you can write your pros and write your cons and do all of that. But the emotional part of making that decision really twists in the wind. I actually
Mhm.
did a coaching call this week with a client who was stuck in decision making. And I just kind of fluked it and said, right, we're on Zoom. And I'm like, right, we're going to flip a coin. And she's like, no, no, like, I don't make a rash decision. Like, no, no. And I'm like, you've been sitting in this for a month, right? Like, let's flip a coin and see how it works out. So I literally pulled out a coin and I flipped it. And while it was in the air, I said, what do you hope it'll land on? And, you know, she made the decision. Like she said, I hope it lands on this. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Like you weren't prepared to honor that, right? That emotional part of your decision making. And yet you've made the decision. And
Mhm.
you know, the decision was A, the coin landed on A. So she was ecstatic because the coin associated with the decision that she'd actually made in that knee jerk reaction. But because I kind of flipped the coin and put the pressure on, like she was able to go, I actually want this. If I hadn't have
Right.
done that, she would have sat in that emotional wheelhouse for ages,
Yeah.
still suffering, trying to
Yeah.
work out between the logic and the emotional house, right? And that's where the
Exactly.
conflict kicks in.
Yeah. And you know, and what I see too is that sometimes when there's just that little bit of support there in the moment, whether it's a coach or, you know, let's say you're dealing with a medical issue or whatever, you know, like a therapist or I mean, when I say therapist, it could be like a physical therapist, occupational, whatever. But just sometimes having that person there to say, okay, this is what you need to do. Let's do it. Flip the coin or whatever it is. And then it's like this almost sense of freedom that they get that
And
they could
relief.
and relief that they couldn't allow themselves
Yeah.
to do by themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to flip a coin on everything from now
Right.
on.
Absolutely. Flip that coin, Leanne.
Yeah.
So, with all that, you know, an area where most people get stuck is identity versus behavior, right? So, some examples of this is like, you know, you should speak up. Like, that's what your internal self is telling you, right? But your identity part of you says, well, and I think of this a lot of times, like in work situations, well, I don't want to rock the boat. And it could be, I don't want to rock the boat because I'm new or because I'm a new leader and I don't shouldn't be making change right away or whatever, right? And then there's also that question is of what if I am judged, right? I mean, even some of the most powerful people in the world, like that is such a fear. Well, what if I'm judged? What if people don't like me? You know, I mean, some people are okay with rocking the boat, but they're not okay with being judged. And so with that, behavior always follows identity. So think of it like this. If your identity is not aligned with your intention, what your behavior is going to do is it's going to sabotage you. I'll say this again. If your identity is not aligned with your intention, and I'm going to pause there for a second because we've talked a lot about this, you know, like identity, like last week's final episode of series 2, identity upgrades, becoming the future you. If your identity is not aligned with your intention, then your behavior is not going to do anything for you. It's going just to make things wackadoodle for you, and nobody wants that. So I think there's that self-awareness that goes into like, okay, like this is my intention and is my identity aligned. And I also like to put in there, are my values aligned? But that usually values are part of your identity. But I like to make that side note because sometimes people just are on autopilot with values and they don't really think about them sometimes, but sometimes your values are misaligned. So is there anything else you want to put in there, Leanne?
And, it's people often think that who they are and the way they are now is who they have to be in the future, but we can upgrade our identity all the
Mhm.
time. And
Absolutely.
and you see it, like if for those of you that might have seen Tony Robbins or done one of his programs, like you walk in as one person, you walk out as another. Your identity is upgraded in 3 days, like, and sometimes just in one model that he shares or one story or one something. So, we sometimes think that in order to change our identity, it's got to be a long, hard process, but it's not. It's a choice.
Yeah.
It's a choice to step up. It's a choice to do something different. And yes, it can feel scary. And yes, we don't know how it's going to be. And that fear of judgment will kick in,
Hmm.
because it's part of our human conditioning. Because if I'm
Yeah.
not part of the tribe, it's certain death on the
Yeah.
savannah. So I have to. So all of those things are going to kick in and do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's you know, understanding that all of this emotional soup that comes in is normal. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that our identity is kind of growing, which is putting us into a little bit of the unknown. But that's okay because our intention is kind of pulling us forward. Our
Yeah.
tomorrow version of us is pulling us forward. And if we're not growing, we're dying, So we want to consistently evolve and we've got to get comfortable with the discomfort of that. That's the only thing
Yeah.
that I want to say because the identity shift feels terrifying until we've done it,
I,
you know? And then you look back and go, oh God, why did I wait so long?
yeah.
Like, how
And
many times have I said that in my life? Oh God, why didn't I make that jump sooner? Why didn't I leave that relationship sooner? Why didn't I, whatever the XYZ is sooner, in
yeah.
hindsight? I often say to people, I wish hindsight was foresight, but it's not. Like, if we
Yeah.
could kind of look through the crystal ball and know the outcome, we would never fear doing all of the things that we're trying to do. But unfortunately, we don't get that clarity until after, which is really shitty,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, and I remember watching it was this interview, this short reel interview where Michelle Obama was being former First Lady of the United States was being interviewed, and it was like in a synopsis, it was an interview around her mom and her mom's aging process and then the end of her life, right? And she brings up this where she kind of almost choked up a little bit, but her mom was like, that went fast.
Yeah.
And Michelle said something to the effect of like, what went fast? And she said life.
Yeah.
And so, we get such a small portion of life on this earth. I mean, really, I mean, in totality of time, our itty bitty time on earth is just up there. So, it's good to like push ourselves to those growth spaces, right? Where yeah, it's going to feel uncomfortable, absolutely, but you're going to be like, oh, okay, I did that and I can move on. Like it wasn't as hard as what I thought it was going to be.
It never is as hard as we think it's going to be. And the sense of pride and confidence that it builds once we've done it, like we have the doubter that kicks in beforehand. But once we come out the other side, it's like, whoo, go me. I just did that. And we need to bask in the glory of that, right? We need to actually acknowledge and celebrate the slight wins, the minuscule steps forward. Because if we can celebrate the little wins, it gives us the motivation to take on the bigger things, right? And then
Yeah.
we can celebrate the bigger wins. So I don't want us to kind of go, oh, it's not worth celebrating. I should have done this 6 weeks ago, and beat ourselves up. It's like, wow, I could have done it 6 weeks ago, but I've done it now. Go me. And giving
Mm-hmm.
ourselves permission to do that, I think is really useful because you're right. It does go fast. Like I'm 54 and I'm like, holy dooly, there's so much time I have wasted in procrastination with
Mm-hmm.
this knowing doing gap because of the conflict between my logical mind and my emotional being.
Yeah,
And I wish I had have learned this stuff 20 or 30 years ago. Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. So before we go into why motivation doesn't work, I want to put forth just a few examples, excuse me, of common identity conflicts. So like in the area of leadership, right, is I want to lead versus I don't want to be disliked, right? In money, which, we've had a couple episodes on money, right, which is one of the most kind of sensitive, it often comes up as a like a very sensitive area in life and conversation, right? Is I want wealth versus I'm not good with money.
Or even to take that one step further, money's the root of all evil,
Right.
because that's some of our conditioning over time through our, so I want wealth, but then it's evil. Like,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
even with the first one, I want to lead, but I don't want to be disliked. Like what, I'm going to lose my friends, especially if you've been a peer and all of a sudden you've kind of got that leadership role, then that really can play with your head.
Oh, it can. Yeah. And I've, when I used to work internal, I saw that a number of times when people got promoted and then they became, whether it was the manager or the director or whatever, but they were like these close knit, closely knit friends with blank, who's now their subordinate, or, and there's a lot of internal struggle and conflict that they go with,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, I want to live into this new identity in myself, but I don't want to lose these friendships,
Yeah.
right? And for me, I think it's all possible. um I always try to look at that positive side of the coin of like, okay, yeah, you can make this work. It may have to work in a little different way, but you don't have to lose these people as friends just because you're now the head of the department.
Yeah.
Right?
But then what sometimes happens is that the rest of them rebel against you because you were a friend and now you're the leader, so you've got to work through that a little bit. And
Hmm.
but you can come out the other side really positively, if
Hmm.
you do that well.
Absolutely. And then, when we talk about health, it's that I want energy versus I'm someone who burns out, right? And then in relationships, I want connection versus I don't feel worthy. So those are some examples of some common identity conflicts. And I know we've all gone through them at different points in our lives. Whether you're um, a very private person or you're more of a somewhere in the middle of the road, and then someone who's just always out there talking about everything in their life. So, and I say that because I don't want people to feel alone, because some people are like, oh my God, am I the only one that's going through this? Because I mean, sometimes it feels like, like, oh my God, I'm the only one that's going through, you know, like money issues. No, you're not. No, you're not.
So, it's just that people don't like to talk about the things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They have shame around them, right? Like oftentimes this emotional side breeds shame and guilt. We talked
Mm.
about guilt earlier.
Yeah.
Guilt is just such a terrible affliction that we impose upon ourselves mostly. And the same with shame, right? Like if we don't feel worthy, it's shame
Hmm.
building. If we don't have a good relationship with money, it's shame building. If we're, not the leader that we thought we should be, it's shame building. But in truth, we're all experiencing this. It's just that some people will talk about it and are courageous enough to do that.
Hmm.
And many, many, many will hide in the shame or drown in the shame, right? Um, so to your point, Jason, we all feel it. It's just that you feel alone because not everyone talks about it.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes at the moment, maybe even within your close knit of friends, right? Maybe you are the only one that's going through blank, right? In that particular moment in time. But when you look at the more global picture, it's like, okay, you know what? I'm not the only one that's going through whatever A is. And and it's interesting, Leanne, when you were talking about guilt and shame, which are natural, right? Like our natural emotions within us. But then when you add on top, like whatever religion you may be practicing or practiced in the past. Like I'm a former Catholic, right?
Yeah, Catholic
And
guilt, man, it's real.
there, but it's real. I mean, it's real. My gosh. But and I haven't practiced for over 20 some years, and it still comes up, right? But so I just wanted to add that on because like there's just the human part of it that just naturally happens in times, but then when you add on conditioned guilt or conditioned shame, that can add complex layers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so hard to unravel some of that, right? Like, not
Mm.
impossible, but you need to do the work. That's what Jason and I say. It's an inside job. You need to do the work. Because just because something comes up doesn't mean it should and doesn't mean we have to buy into it.
Yeah,
But you need to do the work. And
absolutely.
yeah. And it's quite interesting, Jason, because we often beat ourselves up, especially in this knowing doing gap, and think, like, I'm motivated. Why isn't it working? But motivation in itself doesn't actually work. And there's so many reasons for this because people often think that the motivation is the answer, that we need more motivation, that we need more discipline, that we need more willpower, right? Like, you often hear these words thrown up or thrown around, not thrown, but thrown around in our society. Like, you need more willpower, like, you need to be disciplined, you need to do this. But the truth is that motivation is temporary. Like, it's not a permanent thing. Willpower is limited, and limited based on how much sleep we've had, how emotional things are, what's going on in our lives. Like, we don't have control over this kind of resource necessarily because there are so many things that can kind of kick in that limit our willpower. Like, I
Hmm.
can have a lot of willpower in the morning, and by lunchtime, it's out the window and I'm eating Tim Tams, right? Even though, like, I'm committed to eating healthy and committed to doing all of this. And so both of these kind of things they fail under stress. They fail, when there's so much going on in our life and we feel like the world's just coming at us, right? And we're on this treadmill and we're under the pump. Our logical part of our mind goes out the window and our emotional storehouse kicks in at that point. Like, so stress creates lack of motivation and lack of willpower. Well, I won't say it creates lack of it impedes it. It doesn't allow it to kind of show up. Like I said, if we're tired, if we're fatigued, our ability to stay motivated and have this willpower just isn't there. Like, we're just tired. And it's interesting because we don't often give ourselves the ability to rest and have rest as actually a winning formula, as also exercise and all these other things, right? Like, we need to honor the fact that we need to rest. Emotional triggers that show up all the time. And let's face it, in our current global world that's going on right now, most people are emotionally triggered by something, whether it's the
Hmm.
price of fuel or whether it's what's going on in the other side of the world or whether it's what's going on in our own political agenda and environment, whether it's what's going on with the communities that we identify with. There's so many things that are happening that create these emotional triggers. And again, if we are emotionally triggered, our ability to have willpower and motivation is limited. And we need to be mindful of this. So rather than beating ourselves up, understanding is the key because we're not going to rise to our intentions at all. We're going to fall to our conditioning. We're going to fall to our triggers. We're going to fall to our emotions. And I think it's worth knowing we can have the best intentions in the world, but if we're not well, if we're not at our best emotionally, mentally, physically, then we're going to fall into our conditioning and our current identity. And that's not ideal. We really want to step up out of that. And the first way is to acknowledge the truth about who we are and what's going on. Like, it's okay to go, you know what? I'm actually triggered by what's going on. Like, I've seen myself in the last few days triggered about the price of petrol in Australia. Like, it's really, if I'm paying $3.30 for a liter of petrol and it's costing me $200 to fill my car up, where it used to cost me 100, that's an impact. And then that sends me on the money. Oh my God, I want to be wealthy, but there's not enough money, and the scarcity mentality. And then we go down into this spiral. And then if I'm trying to be motivated and have willpower to do something creative, it's not going to happen. No matter how much I try, it's just not going to happen. So we've got to keep ourselves and our emotions in check. Understanding is one part, and then navigating it, not suppressing it, not ignoring it, and not leaning into it too much, but navigating it well is going to be the bridge out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I can definitely tell that's something within myself too that I have been triggered with lately here in the United States, and living in one of the states that has the highest fuel in America, California, which I love California. Love it. But it's like when we're paying over $6 a gallon, I'm like, and I have a hybrid, you know. So, I mean, it is one of those things that, I see it, I get triggered by it, but I'm like, okay, but how can I powerfully navigate through it? Right. It's like, and some of the navigation may be okay, don't just do frivolous driving around, like
Walk
make your
more.
walk more. Exactly. And and like make your intentional times out and about intentional. Like, okay, I'm going to do A, B, and C on Tuesday, but I don't need to drive on Monday. Right. So versus like when gas was like $3, I'd be like, okay, well, I need to go do this errand quick and then this errand, and it'd just be kind of throughout the different days of the week. But now I need to be more intentional about it, because it's like that $6 and whatever cents per gallon does have an effect and does have an impact, right? And so yeah, I've definitely over the last couple of weeks, as gas is just like sometimes like 30 cents a day, and I'm like,
Yep.
yeah. So with all that said, right, how do we bridge the gap, right, but in a practical way? I always love practical ways because it's just practical, and they can, practicality can be little chunks that actually move you ahead, right? So one of the things that you have to think about, right, on when choosing to close this gap or looking at ways to close this gap, is making it identity based versus outcome based, right? So an easy example of the gym, right? You don't want to be saying to yourself, I want to go to the gym, and I'm going to do 10 reps of this. Versus what you want to say is, I want to be somebody in my identity who prioritizes my health. And what does that take in order to do that, right? Going to the gym could be one thing. Doing a self-walking challenge like Leeanne and I are doing, right? Or it could be eating healthier. It could be, a number, like a plethora of things. So like sometimes when you open it up to that broader, but where it comes a part of your identity, it actually opens up different avenues of how you can accomplish it. It just doesn't have to be, well, I have to go to the gym. Well, there's plenty of ways that you can prioritize your health. Gym is one of them.
Dancing around your lounge room could also be one of them, right? Like just moving your body. But I hear,
Yeah.
and it's the I am statement. So rather than I want, because I
Yep.
want is more outcome based. The I am is identity based.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting that you said like, dancing around your lounge, like during the pandemic, that was kind of one thing that I did for part of my exercise routine and health routine was, doing like movement to music, with my headphones on, because, live in a smaller apartment. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you put that I am, it opens up just so much more of a, like a potpourri of opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, there's a smorgasbord of options, right?
Yeah,
As opposed to just the one thing. Yeah,
the one thing.
the one thing. Well, the second thing that we can do as a practical tool is to reduce our emotional friction. So, we can make the action that we need to take feel safe, less scary. And we can do that by making it small, right? And something doable that we can do. Because as I said earlier, our brain resists threat, not necessarily effort. So if we can make the effort feel small, doable, safe, then we're going to be much more inclined to do it because we don't have the resistance in around that, fear mechanism that kicks in unconsciously. So we really need to kind of start navigating, as we keep saying, this internal world. And we can do that by our languaging. So um, if we can change that I can't to I can, you know, um, anything, little words can have a profound impact on how
Mhm.
it shows up in our nervous system. So, I can do that. I can do all things. Is it scary? Yeah. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Like we can kind of shift our languaging, which then makes whatever we're looking at doing feel smaller, feel safer, and definitely feel more doable.
Yeah, and you know what made me think of that, not that it's a small undertaking, right? But as a doctoral student. So, like, I'm literally in my last piece of coursework and then moving into my dissertation phase, right? And the dissertation, I mean, it is a large undertaking, right? But like one of the messages that always comes from faculty is, you have to make your research study doable, you know, which that doable actually somehow subconsciously makes it feel a little bit safer, even though it is very hairy and audacious. But it's like, okay, like, because I always say, you're not trying to solve the problems of the world. You're trying to look at this one smite, tiny piece of research and you know a good dissertation is a done dissertation, right? So it is that frame of thinking sometimes, even around big hairy audacious like projects. It's like, okay, how do I make this doable? How do I make this doable so that it's approved by the Internal Revenue Board, right? And all the et cetera. So that's what kind of came up for me when you were talking about that piece is like, you know, because like I remember when I first turned in, like, I have my dissertation study exactly how I want it. And then, I remember faculty were like, Jason, you kind of got three dissertations going on here. Choose one.
Yeah.
Choose one. And but that's part of like just the refining and the zoning in. But I do have to say, thinking back on it, like as I zoned in clearer and clearer, somehow internally it felt more doable,
Yeah.
and it felt safer,
Yeah.
of like, okay, like I can actually get this approved through the IRB. I can, and all the et ceteras that come from that. So I just wanted to
Breaking it
bring up that
breaking it
particular.
down into bite-sized chunks, right? Like, and that doable piece. If we've got a big, hairy, audacious goal that feels undoable, we will procrastinate and subconsciously do everything to avoid. It's like, where do I even start? This is so enormous, right? Whereas if we can break it down into those chunks and make it feel doable, there is an ease that shows up in our body about that. Our
Yeah.
nervous system isn't on high alert. It actually feels, "Oh, yes, I can do this."
Yes, because it's on high enough alert just through a doctoral program.
Yeah.
So with that, the third way for us to help close, the gap in a practical way is to create evidence loops. And what does that mean? So, celebrate those small wins, because the small wins, you know, it often makes me think, like, people are like, well, I want to be like over here, or like, and it's just like, it's the small wins that get you there, right? So it's making sure to acknowledge those small wins. And because each of those small wins, what it does is it reinforces your identity, or your new identity that you're trying to create, which then will naturally drive behavior, right? So, like, if you kind of think of it like horizontally, small wins, arrow, reinforces identity, arrow, drives behavior. So I think that's an easy way to kind of, like, if you're need to see it in a visual, like, that's an easy way to visualize it. And it just makes sense, right? Because if you acknowledge this, celebrate it, it's going to naturally reinforce your current or new identity you're trying to create, and it's going to drive positive behavior.
It actually came out of the book that I read recently, that Psycho-Cybernetics, which I think we've recommended last week and many times probably during our series. But one of the things that they talk about in there is that, you don't get people to learn things by making it onerous. You give them a task that they can accomplish. And then you celebrate that accomplishment with them, which builds their confidence to then try the slightly harder one. But again, something not too hard that it's going to be impossible for them. So it's like these little bridges that you're building along the way. And every time you have that small win, it reinforces that, new identity and makes you feel more confident, which then makes us more motivated to try something else and stretch ourselves a little bit more. And then we celebrate that small win. And so the trajectory goes up. But if we kind of set something that's too far from where we are now, and we fail in getting there, or we don't accomplish it like we thought we should, that's going to have a negative effect, and it's going to stop us from trying again.
Yeah.
So these small wins are so important, right? And not setting yourself up for failure, but setting yourself up for success in something that you can do. And it might be a little bit of a stretch, but I reckon I can do that. And then you do that and yay, and then you do a little bit more of a stretch. And you're right, over time, that has a significant and profound impact on who we are and how we show up and what we're able to achieve. But it's not because we're jumping off a cliff. It's because we're jumping, onto the next ledge and the next ledge and the next ledge, which allows us to actually build the confidence and competence and drives the behavior to do more and more and more of that.
Yeah.
Because our brain likes acknowledgement. We might not think it, we might not like to admit it, but all of us like to be acknowledged and all of us like to be celebrated. So if we can do that for ourselves and get into the habit and not need it from external validation, but do internal validation and celebrate ourselves, then we're going to be much more inclined to keep stretching and keep doing what we need to do to create the outcomes that we want.
Yeah. It's interesting when you were saying that, Leeanne. I remember a professor, well, he was actually the dean of one of the one of the colleges that I worked at within the university. And I remember him at a speaking event, and he was very, like, he was very big into marketing, right? And he was like, if you look at your program or yourself as a brand, right? And you just keep tweaking it little by little each day, and the tweak could just be something small each day, it's going to get clear, it's going to get more precise, it's going to get basically to a level where it's like, oh my god, wow. And then then you go from there and tweak it from there. So from a kind of a marketing, whether it's like a program or a department or like self brand, whatever, it's just, you can also think of it, for those people with marketing mindsets, just tweaking your brand just a little bit to make it just a little bit better tomorrow. Yeah. And then make it a little bit better on Friday. And then, you can take Saturday, Sunday off if you want.
Yeah. I call that the 1 millimeter shift,
Right.
like just 1 millimeter, like that's all we need, just that little thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The next one that we want to, again, remind you of that can help you to bridge this knowing doing gap is this idea of regulating before you act. Because when you feel overwhelmed and in fight, freeze, we're not going to get into action, right? So when these emotions come up, whether it's fear or overwhelm or whatever it is that kind of has us paralyzed, pause. Literally give yourself the ability to go, oh my God, I'm feeling this, and pause. And then box breathe. Like we've talked about box breathing before, but if we can breathe and regulate our nervous system, we're going to have much more ability to be able to then do what we need to do, because that will reset our parasympathetic nervous system and we'll feel more regulated. Because the truth is, a dysregulated brain and body won't execute. It just won't. Right. So we need to regulate before we act. We need to pause, breathe, reset, and then get into action. Because if we're trying to do it from a dysregulated state, it's going to be much harder. And we don't need to make things harder than they already are. And we don't need to do that to ourselves. So pause, regulate, right? Is the next one that I want to say, because I think it's so important.
Yeah, because there's enough difficult things to navigate in this world that we don't have control over. So, um, don't make, like Leeanne, don't make something difficult that doesn't need to be difficult, right? And the final practical way to help close the gap is to align your environment. And when we say environment, that could be your professional environment, that could be your personal environment, combination of both. Sometimes it's married, like with Leeanne and I, who work from home a lot of the time, both are intertwined very closely together, right? So it's aligning your environment with intention, right? So a couple or a few things that can help aid in that is remove the friction, remove the stuff that doesn't need to be there, you know and if you really take a step back, like you can like literally see with a mindful eye, you can see what's causing the friction, so get it out of the way. It doesn't need to be there, right? Also add positive cues, that's going to move your intention and your identity forward, versus taking it the other direction, right?
And I
And the
like
last,
visual cues for that because I can see it, right? If it's in my line of vision. So whether it's a
mm,
picture or words or something, like adding positive cues are really important. Even on my phone, I'll often have messages come up and go, "You've got this,"
yeah,
right? Like it sounds dicky, but it works. Like I
yeah,
can sit there and go, "Yeah, I actually do have this."
this. And definitely, like those type of cues, especially when you're in those moments of self-doubt, can be like, okay, you know what, like, yes, I do have this and I have what it takes. And like one thing I was going to add to that is, like flowers, for example, right? Like flowers can just brighten up the space. And whether they're flowers of all one color or they're a rainbow of flowers or whatever, just those visual cues that give you the sense of, okay, my environment is aligned and I can move forward. And I also think too, like feng shuiing your environment can also help as a design element for success, right? Like get out of the clutter. Like one thing that I like to do, which I need to do actually soon here, is actually like take everything off my desk, wipe it down, clean it, dust it, reorganize it, because it's easy to kind of create little piles here and there. But it's I don't know, there's something when I do that that's just refreshing and just clicks my mind or my mindset into okay, yeah, I can sit here and like work for 4 hours and create, positive results moving forward versus like, oh, it's kind of cluttery. And, then I take my laptop to somewhere else where maybe it's not as conducive, where I have both screens and all that. So the positive cues, but then also the design of your environment is a major part of success. And when you live and work in the same environment, um, I think it's even more important because I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Leanne, but living and working at home in a one bedroom apartment, it is combined so much of the day that it's just like when it's cluttered or it's this, that, and the next thing, like it's actually almost, it just adds this sense of demotivation, you know?
Yeah, I'm not great at that, and I have to keep working at that because my desk today is my dining table. Like, I have a desk, but it's got so much stuff on it that my desk today is my dining table.
Yeah.
And so, like, we talk about this, and Jason and I certainly aren't perfect at it, and that's the truth of it. And it's always a work in process for me around the space. But I know that when I am at my desk, when it is clear, when I've opened the windows and there's sunshine and fresh air and, my environment is conducive, I can get into that zone, the flow state that they often talk about and knock heaps out. But if I've got stuff everywhere and it's just kind of everywhere I look is messy, it impacts me. It absolutely does. I'm not great at it yet. So it's still a work in progress for me. But like I say, today my desk is my dining table, and that's not ideal.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's not ideal.
But sometimes it is what it is and it has to work for the moment,
For the
right?
moment, right? But
Yeah.
my intention is to go back and do what I need to do at my desk, so that way I've got the clear space. And I
Yeah.
yeah,
And I don't know about you, Leanne, but in like your desk space, like, do you have natural light?
yes.
Yeah. So I have natural light in my desk space too. And it's amazing on just how much that natural light. So, I would, um, what's the word I'm looking for? I would challenge folks who do live and work in at home. If you can design your environment to have yourself by some natural light, it's amazing on how much that natural light and that vitamin D and all that just helps, versus having yourself, in room where there's not a lot of natural light. Um, and I get it. There's some spaces that it just doesn't work. But I would positively challenge folks that who do work and live in the same space to try to design your work environment or at least around some natural light.
Yeah. It was really important to me. I learned that years ago. I sat in an office where I used to, and all the windows were closed and all the curtains were kind of drawn and stuff. Not in my own space. This is when I worked for somebody else. And I remembered one day just going, I cannot do this anymore. And I literally went and opened all the windows and opened all the blinds, and everyone else in the office was like, and I was just, but for me, the way that affected my state, it was profound. And it's like, oh, wow, this really does make a difference, right? Like I
Yeah,
could see the difference. And so that became my habit. The day that every time I'd walk in, I would be opening things up and bringing the natural light in as much as we could. Not all office environments allow you to do that. Not all office environments have natural light. But now, if I have a choice, I'm always by a window. Um,
absolutely.
because the fresh air also, something about the fresh air kind of clears the mental clutter for me. The sunshine and serotonin, has me show up as my best. It also, I find it calming when I can look out a window and actually see a tree or something, or it reminds me to be grounded. So physically and metaphorically, it actually works for me.
Yeah,
Um, so as much as you can do, and if you can't, that's fine, but find ways to bring some of that maybe inside. So maybe it's a picture of a beautiful landscape or something. So it's still reminding you of what's possible.
absolutely.
So let's get real, right, around this. And I want to just kind of pose some questions just for ourselves and our audience to think about. And because if we don't ask better questions, we don't get better outcomes. The quality of our life is based on the questions that we ask ourselves, and that's the truth. And as
Hmm.
coaches, we know that. Like we ask those questions, right, that help people to get clarity. But do we ask ourselves the questions? Often not. So the first question that I really want us to think about is like, where in my life do I know better but not do better? Like, be truthful. Like, where in my life am I shooting on myself? Like, I should be doing this, but I'm not. Like, where's the gap? And think about that. And I would even say to go one step further and journal about it, right? Like, write it
Mhm.
out. Where in your life could you be doing better, but you're not, right? And you know that you want to be doing better, but you're not. Um, get really clear on that. And then identify what identity is driving that behavior. So, not the intention, but the actual behavior. Like, is it that I don't feel confident enough? If that's the case, set yourself up with small wins. Is it the doubter? I don't know that I can, right? Like, what is it that's actually in your identity that's stopping you from doing the behaviors that you need to do? Get clear on that. If it's as you're investigating about safety, right? What can we change about that to make it feel safer? Because we know that when we're feeling that unsafeness, we're not going to execute on what we want to achieve. So, what feels unsafe about changing this? And get really clear on that. And then, what strategies can I build in to counteract some of those fears or some of those
Mhm.
safety issues? Because we can't always eliminate the unknown or the concern, but we can build in techniques and mechanisms to kind of counterbalance that. And I don't want you to blame yourself here. This is not about blame. This is about awareness. It's about alignment and it's about getting into action because all of us want more. And yet that internal stuff stops us, right? So I don't want you to blame yourself and beat yourself up and go, oh, I should, no. This is about, okay, what's getting in the way? What can I do to navigate this? And then getting into action and actually making it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are some powerful questions. Um, I think sometimes, right, is that sometimes you don't want to ask those questions to yourself because you don't want to, it's like you don't want to lift the rug to see what's under there.
Because then you're forced to get into action almost.
Totally. Absolutely. And I also find that a lot of people who suffer from depression, right? That they actually get in that hamster wheel sometimes. Like they don't want to ask themselves those questions because it's it's better and more safer to know, well, this is what my day-to-day looks like, being depressed and not having to get into action. So it's almost, even though they're like internally um mad at themselves or whatever that internal story is that's going on, but it's just like, well, it's better for me to ruminate on that, or they've convinced themselves of that, than taking that rug and saying, wow, like I know I should be doing blank, but I haven't been.
Yeah, and even if we can eliminate the word should, I mean, we use it too often, right? But what could I be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because the should is self-judgment, but could is possibility. And I think even that slight language shift can make a big difference, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
all know what we should be doing. And yet, we use the should stick. Whereas what I could be doing is something completely different. And I think
Yeah.
if we can take should out and add put in, it's again, it feels different in your body.
Yeah. The could, the I am,
Yeah.
etc. Awesome. So are we ready for our
Let's
top
do
three
it.
takeaways?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so before we move in the top three takeaways, so as you all know, um, from last week's episode on identity upgrades, this week, today, we started series number 3 of season 1, The Art of Intentional Living. So today's episode was the first episode of the full series, episode 22 in the full set of episodes. But we're super excited to keep delving into this art of intentional living conversation. Obviously, today we talked about the let's talk the knowing doing gap, why awareness isn't enough. And from today's conversation, here are the top 3 tips. Our first tip is you don't act on knowledge, you act on identity. And I think that, there was even some things for me that became clearer on my own identity of like, yeah, this action and this action were actually not on knowledge that I had, but it was actually on my own, my current identity that I'm operating in, which some parts of that are just no longer serving me. And other new parts are serving me very, very well. Our second tip is that your brain is wired for safety, not success. I know this isn't the first time you've heard this, but just know that your brain is always going to try to keep you safe. It's not out there to say, you're going to be successful in A, B, and C. Nah, it's not wired that way. It's wired to keep you safe in like moment to moment. So that's our second tip. And the third tip is change happens when behavioral feels safe, aligned, and reinforced. So that there's that consistency where it's consistently being reinforced. This is the new positive behavior that I need to be engaging in. And it has, a sense of safety around it. It's aligned with who I am and my values. And just reinforcing that keeps that moving forward in good and positive ways. Anything else you'd like to add here, Leeanne?
No, just stretch yourself that little bit, 1 millimeter stretch, right? Like that's the
Yes.
only thing that, and keep reinforcing your capacity to stretch that 1 millimeter, because that's really where change happens.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then I'll hand it over to Leeanne for our top books and resources.
Yeah. So as usual, we've got a couple of things to share with you here. The first one is the book called The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan. And if anything in this episode resonated with you, this book I highly recommend, because it kind of really talks about um, a really powerful idea that most of us live in the gap. And what I mean by that is that we focus on how far we still have to go to get to where we want to be. And it keeps us stuck, frustrated, overwhelmed, and feeling like we're never going to get there, right? And that we're never going to be enough to get there. But if we can shift into the gain and start measuring how far we've already come, and everything changes, right? So instead of looking at how far I still have to go, it's like, wow, look how far I've come so far. Because when we can look at it from that perspective, we build confidence, we build momentum, and we're more likely to take more action because we can see how far we've come along the journey. It is a continuum. And that's exactly what closes, I should say, the knowing doing gap, right? Like that monumental little shifts along the way and acknowledging them. We've spoken about it a lot. But I really like the idea of, it, the gain versus the gap, right? Don't look at how far I've got to go, look at how far I've already come. So I like that. And I think it's a useful book. Then we have a TED Talk here by Tim Urban, Inside the Mind of the Master Procrastinator. I haven't actually read or seen this yet, but it is one that I want to have a look at. It's come through highly recommended. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then obviously we've got Habits, Dopamine, and Motivation by Andrew Huberman, which kind of talks about setting habits, but also building these spikes of dopamine that keep us in momentum. And then the last one here is Mel Robbins, The 5 Second Rule. We can do anything for 5 seconds, anything for 5 seconds. So I thought I would recommend that one as well. And again, we will put this list in in our channel to make it easier for you to just click the links so you can go directly to them and watch. So again, I just want to ask, what is one area of your life where you know better but aren't doing better, right? This is your chance to shift the scale on that. And let's hope this conversation has supported that.
Absolutely. All right. So, episode 23, which is the next episode in The Art of Intentional Living, is on clarity is power, designing a vision that pulls you forward. So, um, with each of our series, note that each episode is a connection from the previous episode. And as you've heard in many of our episodes, a lot of times we'll go back to previous series. Like, oh, this is a well-being note, or this is a neuroscience of being human notes. So we're super excited for this episode, which will be next Wednesday, April 8th, in LA. And just note that it's going to be 4:30 p.m. I know there's been a lot of time changes in the last few weeks, but we try to adapt between the two different continents, because Sydney is changing, and Australia, or a big part of Australia, I believe, is changing time zones on Sunday. So we're keeping it 9:30 steady in Sydney on the East Coast, and then we're just adjusting by an hour later in the afternoon. And then it'll be this until fall. So we have some nice time of this new time zone that we're moving into next week. And as always, this is our full set of comprehensive episodes this series, which will take us to the middle of June. And then we have a couple of exciting Pride Month episodes that we will be tuning in the end of June, which I can't believe is almost here in a way. So,
Yep.
we'll be excited once we get there. And with that, I think we're ready for the closing.
Absolute.
So, as always, thanks for joining us for today's conversation on the knowing doing gap, why awareness isn't enough.
We hope that it sparked something new, a new idea, a new insight, a fresh perspective, or even, a tough question that's now worth exploring.
Exactly. And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple. It's to have those conversations that matter and remind you that you don't have to figure out this complex, sometimes difficult thing called life on your own. Leeanne and I are here to have the conversations beside you, to give you some tips and tricks and tools for your toolbox to move forward intentionally in life with awareness and wellness and all the et ceteras that come from that.
And so we hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, please, do all the things, like it, subscribe, share it with your friends, and keep the conversation going with us. Because we're really loving having these conversations and unpacking what it takes to live fully, and a life of intentionality, right? And not a life of stuckness.
Absolutely. Because when we talk,
we really talk.
And anything is possible.
So let's talk.
With real conversations.
And limitless possibilities. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everyone. See you next week.
See you next week.